Good evening. Good evening. We're glad you're here tonight. My name is Scott Mays, and I have the privilege of serving as pastor of North Richland Hills Baptist Church. And on behalf of our church family, if you're a guest with us tonight, we're very grateful for you being here. Thanks for taking time on this important issue to gather with us and to give a listening ear. In just a moment, I'll kind of explain to you a little bit about what's happening as well as introduce our speaker this evening. Before I do that, we have a number of individuals in our congregation this evening, our audience. I just want to recognize, I see our mayor here and his wife, Mayor Oscar Trevino. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your service. Been a giant friend to our congregation, and I know we have others as well as Superintendent Darrell Brown. Dr. Darrell Brown, thanks for being here this evening. I want you to be aware that this evening is a little different in that, to my knowledge, the Bible will not be quoted or used, and we're for the Bible here as a church. But tonight is an opportunity that grew out of a recent sermon, and really the opportunity is to equip the people of our community to think and to pause on a very important issue that is potentially gaining rapid movement on same-sex marriage. Throughout my research on that message several weeks ago, I came across the writings and later the video of Ryan Anderson, and we're grateful to have Dr. Ryan Anderson with us this evening. Ryan is both research and writes about marriage and religious liberty as the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow in American Principles and Public Policy. In his work, he focuses on justice and moral issues in economic thought and health care and education, and he has expertise in bioethics and natural law theory. He's also the editor of Public Discourse, an online journal for the Witherspoon Institute of Princeton, New Jersey. His recent work at the Heritage Foundation focuses on the constitutional questions surrounding same-sex marriage. He is the co-author with several others on an important recently released book called What is Marriage? Man and Woman, a Defense. In addition to this, you may have seen him as recently as several weeks ago on networks such as CNN. I believe your microphone was cut on MSNBC, in addition to Fox News. Some of his contributions have been featured in major newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, among others. He has received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Princeton University, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude. He earned his doctoral degree in political philosophy from the University of Notre Dame, where he received his master's degree. He researches, or his research spans natural law, tradition, and conversation with classical and contemporary liberalism. And he has an important dissertation that I'll not say the name of, but it's very important. Tonight, while many of us in the room tonight are believers, we have invited guests, those who may not share a Judeo-Christian moral framework. We want you to be aware this evening that we will invite questions at the end of this presentation, and Ryan will address your questions. You'll come to a microphone over to my left or to the right. A moment ago, there he is. Mark, would you just stand up? And then Danny, would you stand up? These are the two gentlemen who will have the microphones in just a moment. We are very much aware that this is a controversial issue, and there are a wide range of opinions throughout the United States. We invite you to have any and all questions. That's very important, as we do not want to hide the truth. It's very important that we address all of those. But I want to remind you that we are in a house of worship, and that we can interact with one another even when we disagree with one another with tact and diplomacy. So please respect that as you approach the microphones after the end of the presentation. Your tact and diplomacy will be greatly appreciated and honored, and we'll love to hear some of the more difficult questions posed toward Ryan. Thankfully, Ryan and not me. very much aware that a lot of you, or some of you, may not be believers, but I am a believer, and I would like to begin this with a time of prayer. So would you join me in prayer? Father, we come before you tonight, and we thank you for the gift of marriage. We recognize it from the foundation that you spoke. And tonight we pray that you'd have your hand upon us, have your hand upon our nation, and bless us. Bless us for love for one another, even when we disagree with one another. Bless us for the opportunity to share your grace and your kindness. We ask all these blessings upon us this evening. In the name, above all names, the name of Jesus. Amen and amen. Dr. Ryan Anderson.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for having me. As Pastor May said, I'm not going to mention any theology tonight. I'm not going to quote the Bible. I'm also not really going to make a moral argument. I'm just going to talk about marriage as a policy institution. I'm going to think through the question of why is the government in the marriage business? We don't have the state in the baptism business. We don't have the state in the bar mitzvah business. Why is the state in the marriage business? And how ought the state to define marriage? And let me just say by way of introduction that this project is a collaborative project. It grew out of some conversations with a classmate of mine at Princeton and with a professor of ours there. And the three of us, we started discussing these issues because we had a bunch of classmates, and in the case of my classmate, we had classmates. In the case of our professor, he had students who disagreed with us about marriage. And what we were discovering is that they couldn't even understand why we believed what we believed. It wasn't just that they thought we were wrong, it's that they thought we were idiotic. They literally thought there was no rational basis to the view of marriage that has informed all of human history up until 15 years ago. So one of the things that we did, we had a firm conviction that faith and reason are fundamentally compatible. Some people at Princeton were trying to say that faith and reason are incompatible, that reason contradicts faith. That wasn't our experience. We had the firm experience that faith and reason were mutually reinforcing and that they pointed towards the same truths. There were some truths that you could only know by faith. You can only know Jesus is Lord by faith. But there were other truths that you could know by reason. You could know that you're not supposed to steal, you're not supposed to lie, you're not supposed to kill by reason. That's the law written on the heart in Paul's phrasing when he talks in the letter to the Romans. Marriage is like that. Marriage in its natural capacity was something that's built into human nature, and the human intellect could grasp the nature of marriage, which is why we see non-Christians getting married and living out the truth about marriage throughout human history and across the globe. Marriage isn't just the creation of the church. Marriage is the creation of the Creator. And when he created human beings, he created marriage. And from a Christian perspective, Jesus then elevates marriage into a supernatural domain, but it doesn't negate the nature of marriage. And so that's what I want to get at today. What's the nature of marriage, and how can we think about the nature of marriage? Because the nature of marriage applies to all citizens, to all human beings. It's not just the province of a particular church or a synagogue or a mosque. Even though there might be religious aspects to marriage, there's also a civic aspect to marriage. So let me start by saying 2 weeks from tomorrow, the U.S. Supreme Court will be hearing oral arguments on 4 marriage cases. They come out of the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit includes Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, and Michigan. And miraculously, that circuit upheld those state marriage laws. Those 4 states, the citizens went to the ballot box. They voted to define marriage in accordance with the truth as the union of a man and a woman. And whereas other judges have struck down marriage laws, in those 4 states, the marriage laws were upheld. And so as a result, they have been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And what stands on the line here are all state marriage laws. If the Supreme Court upholds these marriage laws, your marriage law in Texas remains good law. If the Supreme Court strikes down these laws, by implication, it'll be striking down your law as well. And marriage will be redefined in all 50 states. The most important thing to know is that there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that requires the redefinition of marriage. There's nothing in the text or the structure or the logic or the history of the Constitution or any of the amendments, including the 14th Amendment, that require the courts to redefine marriage in all 50 states. The simple reason why is that there are two different visions of what marriage is. There's the vision that I'll be defending today, where marriage is inherently a union of sexually complementary spouses. And then there's a vision of marriage where it's just about consenting adult romance and caregiving. The Constitution doesn't tell us which of those two visions is the true vision of marriage. And so where the Constitution is quiet, authority resides with the citizens and with their elected representatives, not with unelected judges. So if in 2 weeks the oral arguments don't seem to be going well, and if at the end of June the Supreme Court redefines marriage for the entire country, it will be doing the same thing that it did 42 years ago in Roe v. Wade. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there's a right to kill an unborn child. And when the Supreme Court struck down abortion laws in all 50 states, it wasn't telling the truth either about unborn human life or about the Constitution. In the same way, if the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down your marriage law, it won't be telling the truth about marriage, nor will it be telling the truth about the Constitution. And we just need to be prepared for that possibility, because it looks like it'll be a 5-4 decision with Justice Kennedy casting the deciding vote. And any time that your faith is residing on Justice Kennedy, it's not a good situation to be in. So that's all I'll say about the courts. Let me just say something about the argument that's being made. The left, those who are in favor of redefining marriage, have a very great slogan. It's a perfect piece of advertising. It's a perfect piece, to a certain extent, of propaganda. It's the phrase marriage equality. And why do I say it's great advertising? It fits on a bumper sticker. You can put up an equal sign as your Facebook picture. You can put up an equal sign as your Twitter avatar. Wonderful for advertising, wonderful for propaganda. It's utterly vacuous. It means nothing. What does marriage equality mean? Everyone in this church tonight is in favor of marriage equality, properly understood. We all want the government to treat all marriages equally. We want the state to treat all marriages in the same way. What we disagree about is what sort of a relationship is a marriage. So you can't get to the question of marriage equality without first getting to the question of marriage reality. What's the nature of marriage? Only if you know what marriage is can you then say whether or not the state is respecting or disrespecting marriage equality. So the reason that we titled our book, we titled it, "What is Marriage?" because that's the central question in this debate. And frequently it's the question that many people on the left refuse to answer. They'll say they're in favor of marriage equality, and you say, well, what do you think marriage is? And they won't give you an answer. They'll say, well, whatever marriage is, it needs to include same-sex relationships. And you ask them, well, should marriage be permanent? Should marriage be exclusive? Should marriage be monogamous? They don't have well-thought-out answers. They haven't thought much about the nature of marriage itself. They just know they're in favor of whatever they call marriage equality. So as we were doing research for our book, this is when it first crystallized in our own minds that there are really two different visions of marriage on offer today. And what we saw was that those who were in favor of marriage equality, this was the basic vision of marriage that they were operating on. They saw marriage as an intense, emotional, romantic, caregiving relationship. That what makes marriage different than other types of relationship is the intensity of the emotional bond, the priority of the relationship. It's what a philosopher at Wayne State University calls your number one person. Marriage is about singling out who the most important person in your life is. And that's what makes marriage different than your second most important person or your third most important person. It has whatever other relationships have, but it just has more of it. That's their vision of marriage. If this is what marriage is, that it's just about an intense, emotional, romantic, caregiving relationship, it can't explain the Western norms of marriage that otherwise are non-controversial, monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency, nor can explain why government is in the consenting adult romance business. So let me just quickly mention that, because I want to explain why this vision of marriage is bad, why it's a faulty vision of marriage, before I run through what the alternative vision of marriage is. So first, if marriage is just about consenting adult romance and caregiving, why does it need to be permanent? Our emotions, they come and they go. Our loves wax and wane. What about marriage, just as such, requires that it be till death do us part? If you think marriage is just about your consenting love life, why does it need to be a permanent relationship? Likewise, why would marriage need to be an exclusive relationship? If marriage is about your consenting adult romance and caregiving, why are you bound to only sleep with your spouse? What is it about this vision of marriage that requires that you be sexually faithful to your spouse? Some people will say that their romance and their caregiving are actually enhanced if they can have extramarital outlets. Lastly, why would marriage need to be between two people and only two people? If marriage is about consenting adult love and caregiving, can't 3 or 4 or more people form that same exact relationship? You can have consenting adult love between 3 people. 3 people can commit to each other to care for each other. What about this understanding of marriage would preclude such arrangements? And then lastly, why would the government be in the marriage business? If marriage is just about your consenting adult love life, couldn't we take the state out of your bedroom? Marriage needs to be about more than just that to explain why every political community in the history of the world has been in the marriage business. So we argue in the very first chapter of our book that this vision of marriage just gets marriage wrong. It's not that it has gay marriage, it's not that it's about homosexuality. It has nothing to do with that. It's a bad philosophy of marriage. We also highlight that this vision of marriage informs many heterosexual relationships. Many heterosexual people understand their own marriages to be just about their consenting adult love life. This is the vision of marriage that comes out of the 60s. This is the vision of marriage that comes out of the sexual revolution. That consenting adults should do whatever consenting adults want to do. That if it feels good, do it. That marriage should last as long as the love lasts. These are all popular slogans that come out of the sexual revolution and that more or less imbibe and embody this faulty vision of marriage. There's nothing distinctively gay about this vision of marriage. It informs many straight people's lives, but it's still a bad vision of marriage. It's the bad vision of marriage, it's the bad vision of human sexuality that gave us the rise of the hookup culture and the rise of out-of-wedlock childbearing and the increase in divorce. So if you think that those consequences to the American family, the increase in single-parent homes, the increase in divorce, have been good things for the United States, then by all means, double down on this bad vision of marriage and legally redefine it to enshrine this vision of marriage into our law in all 50 states. But if you think those developments have been a mistake, that they've been bad, that by encouraging consenting adults to do whatever consenting adults want to do, that there have been lots of victims, victims in terms of children and in terms of women, broken hearts and broken homes, you might want to have caution. You might want to say, Supreme Court, don't redefine marriage for everyone. Let Massachusetts and California redefine marriage, and then we'll wait and see what happens before the citizens of Texas redefine marriage. We'll see how those family structures turn out before we rush to judgment. That would be the rational thing to do. So if that's why the case for redefining marriage fails, what's the alternative? Let me go through this in 3 steps, and then we'll go to audience question and answer. 3 steps that I'm going to highlight. First, it's what is marriage? Second, why does marriage matter for public policy reasons? And then third, what are the consequences of redefining marriage? And so the first, what is marriage? We come at this in our book from the perspective of philosophy. The 3 of us are political philosophers, and we looked to Aristotle for guidance on this. Aristotle is an ancient Greek pagan philosopher. He lived and died 2,500 years ago. He never came into contact with either Judaism or Christianity. Never received an epistle from Paul. He never heard any of the prophets. And yet, Aristotle could think. He was a rational animal, and he knew how to think about reality. And Aristotle taught us that you can analyze any sort of a community by looking at 3 aspects of the community: the actions that they engage in, the goods that they're ordered towards, and then the commitments that they make to one another, the norms that they live by. we use this basic framework to think, well, what makes marriage different than other communities? What makes marriage different than an academic community, different than a business community, different than a religious community? What makes your marriage distinctive from, those are all consenting adult relationships. You can have a consenting adult academic relationship, a consenting adult athletic relationship. You can have a consenting adult worship relationship. What makes marriage a different type of consenting adult relationship? And what we realized as we kept thinking about this is that it's a comprehensive relationship, and it's comprehensive in precisely those three factors. It's comprehensive in the act that unites spouses, it's comprehensive in the goods that spouses are ordered towards, and it's comprehensive in the commitments that spouses make to one another. So it's comprehensive in the act that unites spouses, and that there's an act that unites spouses at all levels of their personhood. It unites them hearts, minds, and bodies. There's then a good that act is inherently ordered towards, which is comprehensive. It's the comprehensive good of creating and then raising new life. And then lastly, it's governed by comprehensive commitments, a comprehensive commitment throughout time, the pledge of permanency, till death do us part, and then a comprehensive commitment at every moment in time, the pledge of exclusivity or of fidelity, when you forsake all others and you pledge to one particular person. Let me unpack this. This is probably the densest part of tonight's talk. It's definitely the hardest chapter in the book. It's something that all of our grandparents simply took for granted. It was common sense. It was just obvious. You wouldn't need an argument as to why wheels are round. In the same way, 50 years ago, you didn't need to explain why marriage was the union of husband and wife. Today we do, but we can unpack it. We can explain, what are the truths about human nature that account for the reality that marriage is a gendered institution. All right, so first, the comprehensive act. I said that what makes marriage different than other relationships, it's not because there's an intense emotional connection alone. There's a comprehensive connection which includes a bodily connection. The way that we thought about this was to say, well, what is it, how to unite comprehensively, you have to unite at all levels of your personhood. And what is it about us as human people? You're not just ghosts and machines. We're not just souls that somehow inhabit a body, but we're an enfleshed soul, or we're an embodied soul. You can think of it however you want to, but we're a mind-body unity. In a Christian context, you can think about the importance of the incarnation, showing that Jesus becomes fully human, and part about being fully human meant being fully embodied. He really suffered in his body because he was truly one of us. And that helps think about our anthropology. What are we? We're not just ghosts that somehow utilize this tactile body, but we're embodied beings. We're an ensouled body or an embodied soul, however you want to think about it. So to unite with another person would require uniting with them not just at the level of hearts and minds. That's what ordinary friendships are like. You ordinarily unite with your friends at the level of hearts and minds, intellect and emotions. You don't ordinarily unite with your friends at the bodily level. You don't normally unite bodily with your roommate at college or with your coworkers. You do unite bodily with your spouse. And that can begin to explain that what's unique about marriage is that it's comprehensively uniting you with that other person, heart, mind, and body. That then raises the question, well, what sort of action actually unites you bodily with another person? To answer that question, we thought, well, what makes each and every one of us one body? Why are you not just a clump of cells? You sometimes hear pro-choice advocates say that the unborn child is just a clump of cells. They're wrong about that. Why are they wrong about that? The unborn child, just like the grown-up, just like the adult, just like the elderly, is an organized entity with lots of various bodily parts, all unified towards the common good of their bodily life. So to take myself as an example, my heart, my lungs, my kidney, muscles, bones, tissue, all of those various parts aren't just clumps of cells. They're all integrating with each other. They're unified with each other for my common biological life. And think about all the various systems that we have. We're all complete as individuals. Take locomotion. We walked in here on our own. When it's over tonight, we'll all walk out of here on our own. Digestion. If you've already had dinner, you're sitting here and you're digesting your dinner, each of you on your own as an individual. Respiration. You're breathing in, you're exhaling on your own. Circulation. Your heart is beating and your blood is pumping and your lungs are oxygenating the blood. So respiration and circulation are interacting with each other. And that's what's then fueling your digestion. All these various systems, unified, integrated. We're all complete as individuals with every aspect except for one. There's one bodily activity that none of us do on our own. It requires a twosome. It takes two to engage in this tango. And to engage in this single biological action requires both a man and a woman engaging in a certain sort of action that truly unites them as one flesh. And I'm not talking about if I walked up to you and stuck my finger in your ear. That's not the act that I'm referencing. It's not as if you've ever given someone a wet willy, you became one flesh with them. But there is an act when the Hebrew scriptures talk about the two becoming one flesh. They're not speaking metaphorically or poetically. Oh, the two are so in love, it's as if they become one flesh. No, the book of Genesis right there is actually revealing something that's true about human nature. It's not true because the Bible says so, but the Bible says so because it's true. So that a man and a woman truly become one flesh at the physical and the metaphysical level. And they become one flesh to such a great extent that 9 months later, it might require a name. And that begins to tell you something about the nature of marriage as to what the good is that it's ordered towards. I said Aristotle says we look at what are the actions that are distinctive of the community, what's the good that's distinctive of the community, and then what are the norms. We're moving on to the second part now. A religious community, what is the good that you seek to worship God? An athletic community, what's the good that they seek to win football games? An academic community, what's the good that they seek to know the truth about Shakespeare or algebra or chemistry, whatever the academic topic for that day is? What's the good that a marriage seeks? It seeks to unite the spouses as one flesh to then create new human life and then raise new human life within the context of a family. That's not what academic communities do. Academic communities aren't ordered towards creating new people. Religious communities aren't doing that. Maybe some orders of nuns run orphanages, but that's not their primary purpose in life. The primary function of that united husband and wife is to then, through that act that unites them as husband and wife, to become mother and father. It can explain why the marital relationship is intrinsically ordered towards the most comprehensive good in this life, which would be creating a whole, entire new human being, and then raising that human being to appreciate human goodness in all of its rich variety. Conscientious parents want their children to experience human flourishing in all of its forms. And so it takes cooperation between both the mother and the father to raise a child precisely to appreciate that. So then lastly, that raises the question of comprehensive commitments. Following the Aristotelian three-part argument, we have to say, well, what is it about marriage that calls for comprehensive commitments? What do I even mean by comprehensive commitments? First, comprehensive commitment throughout time. To unite comprehensively with another person means you hold nothing back. For richer or for poorer, in sickness or in health, to death do us part. You don't have an escape clause. You don't have a golden parachute. You don't say, well, I'll commit to you on the following exceptions or on the following conditions. It's for better or for worse for the long haul. I'm holding nothing back. I'm giving everything. And then likewise, in committing comprehensively, that means you're excluding all others from that type of a relationship. It's not as if you can never have friends with other people, that you can never pray with other people, that you can never read a book with other people, but it is that you'll never sleep with other people. The type of exclusivity that marriage calls for is sexual exclusivity, because the action that is distinctive of marriage is the marital act that unites a man and a woman as husband and wife. So the type of fidelity, the type of exclusivity marriage calls for is precisely the act that transforms ordinary friendships, unions of hearts and minds, into marriages, a bodily connection as well. So by attending this lecture tonight, if you're here without your wife, you're not cheating on your wife. If you sleep with someone other than your wife tonight, you will be cheating on your wife. And this vision of what marriage is can explain that in a way that the bad vision of marriage can't. The bad vision of marriage, well, it's just about an intense emotional connection with however many people or whatever conditions the consenting adults place on that union. So let me wrap up this portion of the presentation tonight by saying this basic vision of marriage hasn't appealed to the Bible, except to say that the book of Genesis isn't telling us something that's true because Genesis is saying it, but it's pointing to a reality of human nature, a reality of human nature that even Aristotle, who had never received either the Hebrew or the Christian scriptures, could recognize. We see actually the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. We see Jews and Christians. We see Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant. Eastern thinkers like Gandhi have all understood this basic conception of marriage. We more or less see every political community that has lasted long enough to leave a record of itself in recorded history has understood marriage to be the union of man and woman precisely because they can create new life and attach new life with their mom and their dad. This is true for the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere, all throughout recorded history up until 15 years ago. It was the year 2000 that the first nation redefined marriage. That's the historical anomaly. Why did that nation go awry? So you could be following me so far. You could say that you understood the first part of the talk, that the consenting adult romance view of marriage is a bad vision of marriage, and that the comprehensive union of sexually complementary spouses is a better vision of marriage. You might then ask the question, well, why does this matter? In particular, why does it matter for the state of Texas? Why do we need the government picking winners and losers between the two visions of marriage? Why do we have the state in the marriage business at all? So let me suggest a couple answers to that. And I'll just say, as a starting point, the reason government's in the marriage business is because the union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and someone needs to be responsible for that child. And marriage is the institution that societies all throughout human history and all across the globe have devised to maximize the likelihood that a man commits to a woman, and then the two of them committed to each other take responsibility for raising that child. Whenever a baby is born, a mother is always close by. She's normally in the same room. That is simply a fact of biology. So biology alone gets you the mom with the child. The question is, will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? That's what marriage does. Marriage helps increase the odds that that father will commit to that mother, and then the two of them commit to that child. So you could say that marriage exists to bring together men and women as husbands and wives to then be mothers and fathers to any children their union might create. It's based on three secular truths: an anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary, a biological fact that reproduction requires both a man and a woman, and a social reality that children deserve both a mom and a dad. You put those three steps together, and it explains why most every culture throughout human history understood this aspect of marriage. Even while they were disagreeing about other aspects of marriage, they were at least understanding this part of marriage. Now, part of this is based on the truth that there's no such thing as parenting. I imagine there are parents here tonight. You're not parents in the abstract. You're mothers and you're fathers. There's no such thing as parenting. There's mothering and there's fathering. Moms and dads interact with their kids in discrete and tangible ways. Don't just take my word for this. Let me quote you a sociologist at Rutgers University up in New Jersey. David Popenoe did a literature review of all of the social science evidence on parenting, and this is what he concluded. He said, "The burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender-differentiated parenting is important for human development, and the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable." He then said, "We should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being, end quote. Let me do some thought experiments with you to highlight what Professor Popenoe was getting at. If I tell you it's a Saturday morning and a 5-year-old boy is in the living room wrestling with one of his parents, and this parent is teaching the 5-year-old boy that it's okay to put people in headlocks, but it's not okay to pull hair or to bite or to gouge out eyes, which parent is most likely in the living room? And the laughter gives it away. It's most likely the father that's in the living room. And this isn't because we've engaged in some international conspiracy to indoctrinate gender roles and that only fathers are allowed to wrestle with their 5-year-old boys. This is what comes naturally to men. Men enjoy wrestling around in general, and fathers enjoy wrestling around with their sons. It's the same way in which fathers tend to be the ones that throw newborn babies in the air, and mothers tend to say, honey, not so high. It's not because we've engaged in some global conspiracy of gender roles in which women have to say, honey, not so high. It's that after carrying a baby in the womb for 9 months, women tend to be more nurturing. It makes biological sense. Men and women aren't interchangeable. They interact with children in different ways. I mentioned the 5-year-old boy in the living room. Fast forward 5 years to the 10-year-old, perhaps in the backyard tossing around a football. Or the 15-year-old boy getting ready for his first high school dance and talking with his dad about the girl that he has a crush on, something like that. What's taking place here, if you step back from the anecdotes, and these are funny, they're meant to make you laugh, but step back from the anecdotes, we know that boys who grow up without their fathers, more likely to commit crime, less likely to graduate high school, more likely to spend time in jail, less likely to be employed. What is the father doing with the 5-year-old wrestling, with the 10-year-old tossing around a football, with the 15-year-old getting ready for a high school dance? He's helping his boy become a man. He's helping his boy channel distinctively masculine tendencies in a constructive rather than a destructive manner. Fathers do something complementary for their daughters. Fathers tend to be the ones that scare away bad boyfriends. Fathers tend to be the ones that police what sort of boy is dating his daughter. The reason why is that fathers, on average and for the most part, tend to have deeper voices than mothers. Fathers, on average and for the most part, tend to be larger than mothers. Fathers, on average and for the most part, tend to have once been boys themselves. You have to add the on average and for the most part because of the rise of transgender identities. But the point here is that the father is more in tuned to what sort of boy might be the wrong sort of boy to be dating his girl. When you step back from the funny anecdote, you see that girls who grow up without their fathers more likely to start sexual activity earlier in life, more likely to be pregnant outside of marriage, more likely to have an abortion. Now, the father who is married to his daughter's mother also models what a good male-female relationship looks like. The father who's married to his daughter's mother shows the daughter something that she might be looking for in a boyfriend or a fiancé or a future husband. He models how a man's supposed to treat a woman. And so we also see that girls who grow up without their fathers more likely to be victims of domestic violence, either by a boyfriend or a cohabitation relationship or a husband. Don't just take my word for this. Let me read you a quotation and then I'll ask you who the speaker was. We know the statistics. Children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundations of our community are weaker because of it. Who was the speaker? President Obama, before he evolved. Now, why did President Obama say this? Because he spoke out about the importance of fathers several times in the first couple of years of his presidency. He explained why when he gave the commencement address at the all-male, historically black college, Morehouse College. So he's addressing the all-male graduating class, and this is what he says. He says, quote, "I have tried to be for Michelle and my girls what my father was not for my mother and me. I want to break that cycle," end quote. President Obama grew up without his father. He experienced firsthand the challenges and the hardship that comes with that. And so he wants to encourage other men to not do that to the women and the children in their lives, starting with himself by being a good husband to Michelle and a good father to his 2 daughters, but then encouraging other men to do the same. So this immediately reminds us to not think that just because you grow up outside of a married mother-father relationship that you're somehow destined for failure. Obama grew up outside of that. And while his presidency hasn't been great, he's turned out pretty well. He managed to get elected twice to the office of the US presidency. But he would be the first to tell you that he had a harder road to travel in life precisely because of the absentee father in his life. So it's not somehow to denigrate children of single mothers. It's certainly not to denigrate the heroic mothers who actually care for those children. It is to acknowledge the reality that if you care about social justice, you have to care about marriage. What we've seen in the past 50 years as the American family has fallen apart, either through the rise of out-of-wedlock childbearing or through the rise of divorce, is that children who are raised by their married mother and father turn out to have a host of blessings, and that children who aren't have all those problems that Obama himself cited. 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison, more likely to have behavioral problems, to run away from home, to become teenage parents themselves. What we've seen is that in the communities where the family is broken apart, that's where child poverty has grown. That's where social mobility has declined. That's where crime has increased. That's where welfare spending has exploded. So everything you could care about, if you care about both the poor and about freedom, if you care about social justice and you care about limited government, is better served by a healthy, intact marriage culture than by broken families where the government then tries to pick up the pieces, whether it's picking up the pieces in the welfare state or the police state. I think 2 of the historic roles that fathers played as provider and disciplinarian, it's not surprising that in the 50 years after the breakdown of the American family, that's where the state has grown the most. Welfare provider and police and prison populations. Those are where the state has grown to supplant what had been the role of the family. So that explains why marriage matters to the government. The state's not in the marriage business because it's a sucker for romance. The state's not in the marriage business because it cares about your love life or my love life. The state's in the marriage business because the union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and someone needs to be responsible for that child, and that child will have the best chance of flourishing in life if the man and the woman who helped create the child also take responsibility for raising the child. This is why the state's not in the bar mitzvah and baptism business. Those are purely religious institutions. The government has no role regulating baptism. The state has a legitimate role in regulating marriage because it's both a sacred and a secular institution. It's both a natural and a supernatural institution. And the state regulates it insofar as it's natural and civic. The church recognizes it insofar as it's natural and supernatural, civic and religious. Let me pivot now to the last question, consequences of redefining marriage. Because you could be saying that you've agreed up until now. The revisionist view of marriage, where it's just consenting adult romance, is a bad vision of marriage. The comprehensive union of marriage, where it's a sexually complementary union of husband and wife, mother and father, is a better vision. The state cares about this because children deserve both a mom and a dad. The next logical question to ask is, okay, but how does allowing Adam and Steve to get married impact any of this? How will allowing same-sex marriage impact your marriage or my marriage or marriage in general at all? And that's probably one of the most frequent questions that you hear in the popular media today. Let me give you 3 answers, and then we'll go to audience question. But 3 answers, all 3 fall under the general rubric of ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. That the law will be enshrining one vision or the other vision of marriage into law. The law will either teach that marriage is a comprehensive union of sexually complementary spouses where men and women commit to each other as husband and wife permanently and exclusively so that children will have moms and dads. Or the law will teach marriage is about consenting adult romance and caregiving of whatever size or shape the consenting adults want it to be. Those are the 2 options on the table. And the law can't be neutral between the 2 options. It will either embrace one or it will embrace the other. And the law will teach, and as the law teaches, it shapes our culture. Our culture then shapes our beliefs then shape our actions. And so over time, you will see one vision of marriage or the other impact the way that your children and your grandchildren understand what marriage is, which will then impact how your children and your grandchildren live out their own marriages. This is how the law shapes a society. Let me give you 3 concrete examples. First, if you redefine marriage to make it a genderless institution, there will be no institution left in public life that upholds even the ideal that every child deserves both a mom and a dad. To even say that a child has a right to a mother and a father will be rendered hate speech. Because what redefining marriage to make it a genderless institution does, it says that men and women are interchangeable and therefore mothers and fathers are replaceable. That the union of 2 men or the union of 2 women is the same thing as the union of a man and a woman. It makes marriage primarily about the desires of the adults involved rather than the needs or the rights of the children involved. Historically, marriage was about both. It had a horizontal component, the union between the spouses, but also a vertical component, the generative component between the generations, between the spouses and their children. Redefining marriage eliminates the vertical. It makes it only about the horizontal. It makes it just about the consenting adults involved, not about the generativity of the relationship and the relations between the generations. If you doubt the capacity of the law to do this, simply consider when the law redefined marriage for the first time. What I'm referring to is no-fault divorce. With no-fault divorce, the state redefined marriage to make it functionally a temporary rather than a permanent relationship. In our law that we inherited from England, in the common law in England, you would file for divorce by citing one of what the common law claimed were the 3 A's: abuse, abandonment, and adultery. 3 serious reasons for saying that a relationship that was expected to be permanent had to be declared over. My spouse is abusing me, my spouse has abandoned me, my spouse has committed adultery. Serious reasons for taking a relationship that was supposed to be till death do us part and saying that the circumstances are so bad we have to grant the divorce. With no-fault divorce, you could abandon your spouse for any reason, indeed for no reason at all. You didn't have to cite grounds for the divorce. Some scholars refer to it as unilateral no-fault divorce because you can unilaterally divorce your spouse without your spouse's consent. There's nothing like this in other aspects of contract law. There's no such thing as unilateral, no-fault, get out of your roofing contract. If you enter into a contract with your roofer, you're going to abide by that contract unless you can cite fault. He installed a leaky roof, so you're not going to pay him, or you have his consent. He agrees to walk away from the contract on terms that you both find acceptable. With unilateral no-fault divorce, you can abandon your spouse without your spouse's consent and without grounds for your divorce. What we saw in the 2 decades after the introduction of no-fault divorce was that divorce rates in the United States more than doubled because the law taught that you need not even aspire to have your marriage be a permanent relationship. You can get out of your marriage for frivolous reasons. And as the law taught, people responded. So right now, we know that in the past 50 years, 50 years ago, I'll phrase it this way, 50 years ago, births to single mothers in the United States were in the single digits. Senator Moynihan, a liberal senator from New York State, he had been a professor at Harvard University, then he became a senator for New York State. He wrote a report 50 years ago last month, and it was a report on the African American family. And he said that while births to single mothers in the US population as a whole were in single digits, they were approaching 25% in the black community. And he said this will spell disaster for African Americans. This will not be good for them. If we care about the poor, if we care about minorities, we have to care about families. And something is going wrong in our social policy that 25% of African American children are being born outside of marriage. Fast forward to today. What are those numbers? It's 40% of all Americans who are born to single mothers. It's 50% of Hispanics, and it's over 70% of African Americans. These children have done nothing wrong in life, but the family structure into which they arrive in life will make it much harder for them to flourish. So it leads many policymakers to say the greatest issue of social justice today in our country is the crisis of absentee fathers. So the question for pre-evolution Obama, the Obama who knew those statistics so well, is how do we as a society insist that fathers are essential when the law has redefined marriage to make fathers optional? That's the first consequence of redefining marriage. If you make it a genderless institution, it's very hard to say that both mothers and fathers matter. Second consequence is that the redefinition of marriage won't stop here. And the best way to illustrate this is to simply highlight 3 words that activists have already coined to describe where they would like to see marriage further redefined. The first is the word throuple. A throuple is a 3-person couple. Take the word couple and chop off the C and then add a THR. Throuple. This was in New York Magazine. New York Magazine is a prominent publication up in New York City. And what happens in New York City today will migrate to Ohio in 10 years, and then it'll come to Texas 10 years after that. And that's how social change takes place in the United States. It starts on the coasts, moves into the center, and then eventually gets in the middle. So this idea was, New York Magazine was profiling a throuple that lives in Brooklyn, New York. This was 3 men who live with each other and love each other. They sleep with each other. They cook meals for each other. They want to be able to visit each other in the hospital. They want to be able to have a joint checking account. They want to be able to file a joint tax return. If your understanding of marriage is that it's about consenting adult romance and caregiving, then they have a marriage. And if you go before the US Supreme Court and you sue for marriage equality for the same-sex couple, on what basis do you deny marriage equality to the same-sex throuple or to the opposite-sex quartet? Again, heterosexual, homosexual doesn't matter for this vision of marriage. If you have 4 people, 2 guys and 2 girls who want to form a group marriage, why is that relationship not worthy of marriage equality? Because the way that we arrived at monogamy in Western law and culture is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in the marital act that can create new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. Marriage is about uniting those people in a stable, permanent, exclusive relationship. But once you say the male-female part of marriage is irrational and arbitrary and bigoted, what is your legal basis for requiring monogamy? What's magical about the number 2 once you say the male-female part of marriage is irrational? So that's the word throuple. The next was the word monogamish. Monogamish is a play on the word monogamous. Monogamish, this was in the New York Times Sunday magazine, probably the most prominent publication in all of American journalism. It was a profile of the gay rights activist Dan Savage, and the interviewer asked him, what can straight couples learn from gay couples? How will straight marriage be impacted by gay marriage once it's been redefined everywhere? He said, straight people will learn the virtue of the monogamish relationship. A monogamish relationship is a two-person relationship, that's the mono part, but it's a sexually open relationship. That's the ish part at the end. The title of the article was Married, with Infidelities. And they were redefining the vice of infidelity as the virtue of a monogamish relationship. Savage's argument was that the way that straight people practice marriage in the United States is outdated. It's a holdover from Judaism and Christianity that told people they had to have one sexual partner till death do them part. This is inhumane, it's unrealistic, it leads to sexually frustrated people. Much better to have your romantic caregiving relationship be between two people, but provided there's no deceit and there's no coercion, you should be free to seek sexual fulfillment with other people. Don't make your romantic caregiving relationship synonymous with your sexual relationship. You should be free, provided your spouse consents and isn't deceived, to live out your sexual fantasies with other people. And that this will actually strengthen your marriage. Because now you won't be having sexual problems in the bedroom, you'll be solving those with other people. Then, therefore, your joint checking account and your cooking meals and visiting each other in the hospital, that'll be enhanced. The last is the term wed lease. This was introduced in the Washington Post. The Washington Post is like the grown-up, non-crazy newspaper on the left. If the New York Times and the LA Times are kind of like the crazy liberal papers, the Washington Post wants to present itself as like the reasonable, moderate paper. This was an op-ed written by a lawyer who coined the word wed lease. Wed lease is a play on the word wedlock. Wedlock denotes something that's strong and sturdy and permanent. Wed lease was meant to denote the exact opposite. The lawyer was arguing, just like you can lease a car or you can lease a house, you should be eligible to lease your spouse. His idea was that we should have 5 or 10-year marriage contracts that could then be renewed on good behavior. That if they were going well, you could renew them, but if they weren't going well, they would just automatically dissolve. In the same way that if you lease a car, if you want to renew it after 2 years, you can renew your lease, or you just get a new car after 2 years. And your heart doesn't break when you have to turn over the keys. You only signed up for a lease. So you had 2 years on your apartment, 2 years on your car, and now it's time for a new one. Same idea here. The argument was that we have this outdated, inhumane holdover of Judaism and Christianity, that marriage is supposed to be a permanent relationship, but that's unrealistic. Human beings can't pledge to love one person forever. Nothing in life is lasting. Everything is fleeting. And it's only because we have an unrealistic expectation that we can have lifelong love that when it inevitably fails, that's what breaks our heart. That's what causes the turmoil. And if we only had better expectations, if we were only expecting a 5-year wed lease in the first place, we wouldn't have these bad experiences. So I said at the beginning I wasn't going to talk about theology, I wasn't going to talk about the Bible, I wasn't going to talk about morality. I will let each and every one of you decide for yourself what the morality and the theology of thruples and wed leases and monogamous relationships. I don't foresee this church engaging in those practices in the near future. I'm probably right about that. That's all I will say about that. But think about it from a policy perspective. I said the reason the government's in the marriage business is to get one man and one woman to unite with each other permanently and exclusively so that any children that they help produce will have a mom and a dad. The throuple, the wed lease, the monogamous relationship directly undercut that purpose of marriage. What they do is they increase the number of sexual partners that men and women have with each other, and then they decrease the amount of commitment that men and women make to each other. So they increase the odds of men and women creating children with multiple partners to whom they are not committed. This increases the number of fragmented families, the number of fatherless children. And yet all three of these new words follow as a logical matter once you get rid of the male-female part of marriage. Once you say marriage has nothing to do with sexual complementarity, why is it monogamous, exclusive, and permanent? If you think about this in the terms of like a building, sexual complementarity is the foundation of the building on which monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency rest. The justification, the foundation for monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency is complementarity. Once you eliminate complementarity, it's a house of cards that over time will self-destruct. Because what this does is it dissolves marriage into contract law. And so marriage can be a contract between consenting adults of whatever size or shape that consent comes in. Whether it's between 2 or 3 or 4 or more adults, whether it's a sexually exclusive or a sexually open relationship, whether it's a permanent or a temporary relationship, the consenting adults get to set their terms. It dissolves marriage. It redefines marriage into contract law. So that was the second consequence of redefining marriage. Let me mention the third, and I'll go through this more briefly, because we saw this play out in Indiana the week before Easter. This is the consequence for religious liberty. And the best way to illustrate this, again, it's ideas have consequences, bad ideas, bad consequences. The primary argument that the left has made for the past 10 years is that if you are opposed to same-sex marriage, you're today's equivalent of the racist bigots who were opposed to interracial marriage. So bad idea is saying that belief that marriage is the union of a man and a woman is like racism. Bad consequence, the law will treat you the way that the law treats racists. And so you can just ask yourself, how does the law treat racists? Do we have any publicly racist charities in the United States? Do we have any publicly racist universities and schools in the United States? Do we have any publicly racist businesses in the United States? And the answer to that question is no. The state won't allow that. It won't give the license. It won't give the accreditation. It has non-discrimination laws for the businesses. So whether it's the charity, the school, or the business, the state has a way of combating this. That's what the left wants to see happen for religious charities, religious schools, religious businesses, for anyone who tries to run their institution in accordance with the truth that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. I will just mention a couple examples. In Massachusetts, in Illinois, in San Francisco, and in Washington, D.C., after those jurisdictions redefined marriage, Christian-run adoption agencies were forced to shut down. These adoption agencies weren't trying to prevent gays and lesbians from adopting from other agencies. They weren't saying that gays and lesbians can't adopt from the state-run adoption agency or from the secular humanist adoption agency. They only said the children that have been entrusted to our care, we want to find them homes with married moms and dads. This takes nothing away from anyone. We just want to do what we think's best for the child, and we have lots of married moms and dads who want to adopt from us. Just leave us alone. All they were asking for was for the government to leave them alone, and the government said no. They said what you are doing is discrimination. If you won't treat the same-sex married couple as equal, again, the phrase marriage equality, as equal to the married mom and dad, you're discriminating against them, and we won't let you run a discriminatory adoption agency. So in those 4 jurisdictions, Catholic Charities and evangelical adoption agencies, LDS adoption agencies were forced to shut down. This does absolutely nothing to help children. It didn't help more children find homes. It didn't help more parents decide to be adoptive families. Frequently, it's the religious adoption agencies that have the best success at getting parents to adopt in the first place, because adopting a child is not like renewing your driver's license. The DMV doesn't even do a good job at that. Imagine what the government-run agency does when it comes time to adopt a whole new living, breathing human being. So you might want the religious adoption agency because they can best facilitate welcoming a new life into your family, and the state said no. We've also seen cases of bakers and florists and photographers, small business owners, people of faith, who simply asked to be free from government coercion to run their small businesses in accordance with their beliefs. In none of these examples was it a business owner that said, I refuse to serve you if you're gay or lesbian. They had no problem baking a happy birthday cake for a gay customer, doing a get well soon floral bouquet for a lesbian customer, taking headshots or passport photos of a gay or lesbian customer. That wasn't the objection. The only objection was to helping to celebrate a same-sex wedding. They said that I can't use my God-given gifts and talents to help celebrate a lie about marriage. One of the best-known examples involves a 70-year-old grandmother in Washington State. She's had a gay employee, and she was serving this particular gay couple for 9 years. They were regular customers of hers. They would come in together. She knew they were gay. She didn't have a problem selling them flowers until they came in after Washington State had redefined marriage and said, "We're getting married. Can you do the floral arrangements for our wedding?" And she said, "Look, you know I love you guys, but I can't do a same-sex wedding. I'm an evangelical. It violates my beliefs about marriage." The gay customers left. Somehow the state attorney general found out. It wasn't the gay customers who filed charges. It was the attorney general who pressed charges on this 70-year-old grandmother. He wanted to make an example of her, to say what she did was discrimination, and I will not tolerate discrimination in my state. He pressed those charges against her in both her professional and her personal capacity. So she was on the line to lose not only her business, but also her home. And the judge allowed her to be sued in both her professional and her personal capacity. The first round of court hearings concluded, it was either earlier this month or I think it was last month, so it was in March. And she lost, and she's been hit with a fine, and she's appealing it to the next higher level of courts in the state of Washington. The basic vision here, though, is that if you think that the belief that marriage is the union of a man and a woman is equivalent of racism, the Attorney General did nothing wrong. But if you think that it's the truth about marriage, why can't we just leave the photographer, the baker, the florist, the Catholic Charity Adoption Agency free? Why can't we let them run their organizations in accordance with their beliefs? It's not as if conservative Christians have a monopoly on cake baking and flower arranging. There are plenty of bakers and florists and photographers who, one, support same-sex marriage, and two, are interested in making money. So in a free market society like ours, you say live and let live. If you are in favor of gay marriage, have a gay marriage, and go to a business that will cater your gay marriage. If you're not in favor of gay marriage, don't have the government coerce you into celebrating the same-sex wedding. So with that, I'm going to stop here. We have about 20 minutes for questions, and the floor is open. I think we're going to have microphones, and yep. Don't be shy.
Brian, thanks for coming.
Sure thing.
Appreciate it. A couple questions. One is, what do you say to folks who say, hey, this ship has sailed, look at the polls, and it's all going one direction. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that? And then the second thing is, I was really surprised to see how this issue played out in France. And I was wondering if there were any lessons we could take from the way that, that this issue played out there.
Perfect. Yeah. So let me take those in reverse order. What we saw in France was really remarkable. France already had civil unions for same-sex couples. They were debating whether or not to redefine marriage, which would have greater consequences in terms of parenting and in terms of adoption. And they had over 1 million people show up to march against redefining marriage. They saw it as a social injustice. And their phrase, it works very well in French, it doesn't translate as well in English. It was that there's no right to a child, but there's a right of a child. And so the idea here was that children have a right to a mom and a dad. Men and women don't have a right to have a child. And so it turned the debate upside down, because the way that the debate plays out in the United States, we almost are always focused on the rights of consenting autonomous adults. I think one of the, possibly the only good thing about a more kind of like socialist outlook is that you think more about those who are marginalized in the community, which would include children. And so the French were not thinking just in terms of what are the rights of the adults involved. They were thinking, what are the rights of the children involved? What's best for the children? And so what was remarkable was that you had gays and lesbians who were leading the protest against gay marriage. They said, look, I want to be free to live how I want to, but just because I'm attracted to another man doesn't mean a child should go without a mother. They would make those arguments. When we make those types of arguments here, we get accused of being homophobic or anti-gay. That said, to answer your second question, I think some of those arguments and some of those voices will be some of the most effective. You can do a Google search for 3 different amicus briefs that were filed 2 weeks ago at the US Supreme Court by children of gay and lesbian couples who love their gay and lesbian parents, but say that being raised by 2 moms or 2 dads was not the same thing as being raised by a married mom and dad. And so they're sharing their testimonies. And so here I just think when you say it looks like the ship's already sailed, it looks like the tide has turned, it's to say that we've been here before. 40 years ago, this is what the liberal media elite were telling us about abortion. They said, look, the Supreme Court just settled the abortion issue. And then they said, look at public opinion. All of the young people, the young generation, is in favor of abortion rights. The only people who are pro-life are the elderly generation, middle-aged people and retired people. They said that, a generation or 2 from now, the last pro-lifers will be in nursing homes and inside the walls of the Vatican. That was their outlook on this. You had politicians who started their political careers being pro-life. Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Ted Kennedy, and Jesse Jackson all started out being pro-life politicians, and then they evolved to become pro-choice. And so 40 years ago, in the late 70s, it wasn't a particularly good time to be a pro-life American. It looked really bleak. The Supreme Court had just claimed the Constitution requires legalized abortion in all 50 states throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. The younger generation looked to be fully in lockstep with this, and all of our political leaders were going the wrong way. And then something happened, and now my generation's more pro-life than my parents' generation, and the majority of Americans identify as pro-life. There were many things that happened. Part of it was that some political leaders had great courage. Ronald Reagan is the only sitting president to ever write a book while in the Oval Office, and the book that he wrote was titled Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation. And so 1981, Reagan enters the White House, and he firmly solidifies his administration and his party as a pro-life administration and a pro-life party. And they work to undo Roe v. Wade. And he puts Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. We then had people like Henry Hyde come up with the Hyde Amendment, which prohibited tax dollars from going to pay for abortions. We had groups like Students for Life and Feminists for Life and Women Speak for Themselves and Silent No More come into the forefront of the abortion movement. So it wasn't old, elderly, angry white men who were leading the pro-life movement. It was now young, attractive women speaking for themselves about how abortion hurts women. You then had an amazing outgrowth of crisis pregnancy centers and pregnancy support centers just pop up all across the United States. Almost every city that I've been to speak to, they have something in their city to help a woman who's experiencing an unexpected pregnancy. So they could combine good kind of political stuff, good research, academics wrote books about the culture of life, with good spokespeople, good grassroots activism, with good on-the-ground material support. And if you look at what that has done in the past 30 or 40 years, it's totally reshaped the nature of the abortion debate. The same thing needs to happen on the marriage question. We need to have academics and scholars and politicians who are willing to make the case for marriage. We don't have very many articulate politicians who can defend the truth about marriage. We don't have very many scholars who can do this. But that's not surprising. 20 years ago, no one thought it needed to be defended. And so the other side got a 20-year head start on attacking the truth, and we now need to catch up on defending the truth. We need to have better spokespeople. We're going to hear, I think, from some of the children of gay and lesbian couples speaking for themselves about what that experience is like. And then we need better ministries, not only to people with same-sex attraction, but better ministries to families in general. Why is it that it's at this historical moment that we're debating whether or not to legally redefine marriage? It's because heterosexuals already made a mess of marriage in the first place. It's only in a society where marriage has already been degraded and debased that you would even consider redefining marriage to eliminate sexual complementarity. So it's only after the 60s, it's only after the sexual revolution, it's only when you get the spike in non-marital childbearing, out-of-wedlock childbearing, the spike of divorce, that it even seems logical to redefine marriage. Gays didn't cause this. Gays just said, look, the logic of the relationship, you guys have already changed it. It's just about consenting adult love now. We want in. So we need better ministries to form our own communities, to know the truth about marriage and to live it out. To be what's distinctive about marriage? Why is it a permanent, exclusive, monogamous union of husband and wife? And how can we help people develop the habits, develop the virtues to make their families successful? I think those will be some of the new ministries, the new institutions, the new groups, the new think tanks, the new arguments that'll be developed in the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's not as if this battle is over, it's just beginning. That would be like saying after Roe v. Wade, the pro-life battle was over. Roe v. Wade is what started the pro-life movement. And 40 years later, it's not over, it's growing stronger. And we see that more pro-life laws have been passed at the state level in the past 10 years than in the previous 30 years combined. Some states, it's now they only have 1 or 2 abortion clinics left. I think Texas now has 5. Is that what it is? After the most recent law that you guys had passed, you keep reducing the number because you can regulate them. And if you say you have to meet surgical standards, you have to make hospital standards, you have to have informed consent laws, there are things that you can do even without overturning a bad Supreme Court case to protect unborn children. And we see that the abortion rate has markedly declined. You know, when it peaked, I think it was something like 1.3 million abortions a year. Now it's 700,000. That's still way too high. I don't want to paint a rosy picture on this. I'm just saying that it's not as if all is lost. And that there's always something that each of us can do depending on our own vocations. So mine is more of a scholar, philosopher, so I do that. Other people are to be pastors, so they engage in the pastoral ministry. Other people, you might be an artist. We need better TV shows, better movies, better music, rather than degrading a culture of marriage and chastity, one that builds it up. We need accountants and business people to donate money to these causes. So whatever your particular calling is in life, there'll be a way that you can contribute to this. Yep, we'll go to you.
You mentioned why it's important for children to have fathers, but my grandson has a classmate, who's raised by 2 fathers. What is the importance of the role in the children's life?
Great. So right now, the reason I mentioned the role of the father is that that's where we have all of the social science. Right now, from a scientific perspective, we don't know what it's like to grow up without a mother. That just hasn't been studied because it really hasn't happened throughout human history. If you think about what we talk about when we mention single parenting, it's almost always a single mother. Because when the baby is born, the mom is there. And the question is whether or not the father is going to be there. So the vast majority, something like 95% of households that have one parent living with a child, it's the mother living with the child. So most of the social science that we have, it's about absentee fathers. And as a result, the family scholars are really able to kind of zone in on, what's the particular function that the dad plays by looking at the family with the mom and dad and then looking at the family with only the mother and see that the father does something really important in how he raises his boys to develop into men, how he protects his daughter from predatory men, things like that. So that said, we don't have any studies yet on intentionally motherless children. But the scientists do know some things. They know that mothers tend to be the ones that are more nurturing, more supportive. Mothers tend to be the ones that encourage their children to be more kind of comfortable and confident with who they are, whereas fathers are the ones that tend to like challenge their children to reach for higher heights, climb the tree higher, things like that. If you think about it, if you have a baseball game and you strike out, the father's probably going to be the one that tell you do better next time. The mother's probably the one that's going to say that was okay, you did your best. This is just, there's a different style of how moms and dads interact with children. And we don't, it'll be interesting to see once, it'll be unfortunate on the one hand, because the only way scientists could even study this would be if there were large enough numbers of motherless children to see what the impact is of growing up without your mother. I would rather not have those studies ever conducted, because I'd rather not have guinea pigs, a group of children growing up without their moms.
Okay. Thanks so much for your work, by the way, and thanks for being here tonight. I heard, I believe it was Justice Sotomayor who asked the question about if marriage is simply to produce children, what role is the government in recognizing heterosexual marriages that have no chance of producing children? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, great question. So this is the infertility objection. And there are a couple of different ways of thinking about this. Let me give you kind of the deeper philosophical one first, and then I'll give you the more policy one. The first is to say that the state has an interest in recognizing all marriages, and it recognizes all marriages because the vast majority of marriages result in children. So there's the one question of what is marriage, and then there's a second question of why does marriage matter? Marriage matters because the majority of marriages produce children and unite children with their mom and their dad. But that doesn't therefore say that marriage is only about producing children. There are two different ways of reading Augustine. On one line, it looks like Augustine's saying that marriage is just a vehicle for baby making. The other line of reading Augustine says that his understanding of marriage was that it was primarily about the two becoming one. It was about this comprehensive union of husband and wife. But then the reason that the political community cares about it is that the majority of those times when the two become one, 9 months later, a child is involved. So that's kind of the deep philosophical way. The other thing to point out is that in both the common law of England and the canon law of the Catholic Church, for example, infertility was never grounds for an annulment, but impotency was. The difference here is that if you're impotent, you never actually consummate your marriage. If you're impotent, you can't actually consummate a marriage. You never become one flesh. And so if you were impotent, that would be grounds for an annulment, saying a marriage never actually took place because you never engaged in the marital action. Whereas infertility was never grounds for an annulment. In both canon law, civil law, and the common law of England, they said, no, a marriage took place. It's just that the marriage never reached its telos, which was to both unite the husband and man and woman as husband and wife and also produce offspring. That said, if that's kind of like the deeper philosophical answer, the policy answer is that we make public policy based on wholesale, not retail. You make public policy based on the rule, not the exception to the rule. Not every marriage will produce a child, but every child is the result of a male-female union. And marriage policy tries to maximize the likelihood that those children will be conceived inside of and then raised by their married mother and fathers. And recognizing a small number of infertile marriages doesn't take away from that purpose at all, whereas redefining marriage to say that two men or two women are the same thing as a man and a woman directly undercuts that purpose of marriage, because it sends the signal that men and women are interchangeable, mothers and fathers replaceable. The last thing to mention here is that it's very, very, very rare for both husband and wife to be infertile. So the example that Sotomayor gave was of a woman who was, aged 50, so post-menopause. And what she didn't realize was that assuming that her husband remains faithful to her, he's not creating children with other women. It's very likely that he would still be fertile. Men tend to be fertile until the day they die. And provided that that man remains in a monogamous, exclusive, permanent relationship with his wife, he's not creating children with some other woman that would then create a fatherless situation, a fragmented family. So the norms of marriage, monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency, matter for all families, even if a given particular one doesn't reproduce.
Thank you for coming. It would appear from what you've spoken on that the Supreme Court in the United States has no concern about the economic consequences of their acts, of their decisions. You mentioned default divorce in particular, and your last question kind of throws you off track because you talked about an infertility situation, but nevertheless, with redefinition of marriage, you're going to have more and more broken families, more and more children are going to fall back on the government. The economic consequences in the long term are enough to actually bring down the nation.
I think that's right. So, I mean, I think what we have seen, there's another great amicus brief that was filed by over 100 scholars of marriage, and they point out that the nations and the states that have redefined marriage so far and who keep data on these issues have had at least a 5% decline in their marriage rate. What this shows, or what it suggests, is that the states and the nations that were most inclined to redefine marriage in the first place already had a pretty low estimation of what marriage is. So it's a broken marriage culture that causes a society to redefine marriage, but then redefining marriage accelerates the breakdown of the marriage culture, because it sends the signal that marriage really isn't that important after all. It's simply about your consenting adult love life. Why do you even need to get the marriage certificate in the first place? Why do you need to be monogamous, exclusive, and permanent? And so the scholars pointed out that if we had, which is the lowest number was 5% reduction, some states, some nations had higher collapses of their marriage rates, that if you play that out over a generation, a 5% reduction in the number of people getting married would lead to a huge increase in the number of non-marital childbirths, assuming that, we're not having less sex, right? So we're still having the same amount of sex, it's that 5% of it's taking place, 5% additionally is taking place outside of marriage. You can expect, I think they calculated something like 600,000 more children born to single mothers and a similarly large number increase in abortion. Because of those non-marital conceptions, a certain percentage will be brought to term and a certain percentage will be aborted. So again, it's not to say that somehow gay marriage causes this. It's to say that as you misunderstand what marriage is and why it matters and why it's important, society as a whole ceases to live it out. And that those will have serious economic consequences, because it's for the breakdown in the family that can best account for the type of inequality and the lack of social mobility that the left constantly talks about. You hear Obama and Clinton talking about inequality and social mobility all the time without ever recognizing that family structure accounts for this much more than tax policy does. That the wealth of nations really depends on the health of families. Yep, we'll do this one more.
Thank you for coming. Fast forward to 2 weeks. If the left did win, how would that affect the church, our pastor, as the grandmother in Washington, who did not want to celebrate that union, and that our church, our pastor did not, or any church? How would that affect the churches?
So ideally, it wouldn't impact houses of worship at all. That if the First Amendment means anything, it at least means freedom to worship. That said, Houston's not that far from here, and you saw what happened with the subpoenas for the sermons. Canada is our neighbor to the north, and we know that some, I think it was a Catholic archbishop who had delivered a sermon on marriage and sexuality, was brought up on charges for hate speech under Canada's hate speech law. So it's not that far out of the question, but ideally the First Amendment at least protects freedom to worship. It truly protects the free exercise of religion, and we hear the left redefining religious liberty as solely freedom to worship. So they're at least willing to say that what takes place inside of the chapel is protected. Our founding fathers would have said that what takes place Monday through Saturday should be protected as well. That free exercise of religion means not simply you can pray how you want to pray, but you can lead your entire life in accordance with your religious beliefs. But that hasn't happened for the charities. It hasn't happened for the bakeries, the photographers, the florists. But it depends on where you're located. It depends on your local laws, your state laws. A lot of this will be decided piecemeal. It'll be a patchwork where states like Massachusetts and California will have more progressive, or in my sense, regressive laws. They'll be more restrictive, more coercive. And then places like Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Indiana, had Governor Pence not caved at the last minute, would have had greater protections for religious liberty. So one of the most important things that any community can do is the first step is at least protect your rights to continue leading your life in accordance with the truth about marriage. The pro-life movement, so the first question we had, I pivoted to lessons from the pro-life movement. One of the first things the pro-life movement did was make sure that they wouldn't be complicit in the evil of abortion, that they wouldn't have to pay for abortion and they wouldn't have to perform abortions. In the same way, I think it'll be important for people who believe the truth about marriage to make sure that they won't be complicit in speaking or endorsing a lie about marriage. And so religious liberty protections will be important.
Ryan, let me give you one softball question.
Okay.
Why would we deny homosexuals the right to marry?
Sure. So
I'm asking that question on behalf of high school students who need to wake up, and middle school students who are largely thinking that it's a framing of a right. Why would we deny them that right? Last question.
Yep, perfect. No right is being denied here. In all 50 states, 2 men or 2 women can live with each other, they can love each other, they can go to an Episcopalian church and get married if they want to, they can work for a liberal business if they want to. There's no right that is at stake here. You don't have a right to have the government call your consenting adult relationship of your choice a marriage. If you go down that line, then every consenting adult has a right to have the consenting adult relationship of their choice recognized by the government as a marriage. The only way to have good marriage policy is to have the government recognize the truth about the nature of marriage and grant marriage licenses to anyone who's interested in entering into that relationship. If you're not interested in entering into a male-female husband-wife relationship, then you're not interested in getting married. You're interested in having some other type of relationship, and the law doesn't prevent you from doing so. Defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman doesn't impinge on anyone's liberty. So people in all 50 states are free to live and to love how they want to. They're not free to have the state redefine what marriage is. Yep.
Ryan, we thank you for being here this evening. He has left the somewhat great state of Louisiana to come over to the even greater state of Texas. He was there earlier today. We thank you for your time. The aim of this evening was to equip people within our community with accurate information with regard to the marriage conversation that is being bandied about within the United States currently. We hope that as a result of this evening, you will speak to family members and friends on the importance of this subject, that you'll take some of the information. Tonight's lecture will be available on our church website later within the week, and we invite you to go there and to look at this and look at the questions as well. Ryan's book is available at bookstores such as Amazon.com, where I checked it a few moments ago. You're invited there to go and read that. And please engage with these resources to further this conversation. So we want to thank you for being here tonight. On a personal note, my mentor, Dr. Michael McDowell, is here tonight, a man I greatly love, one of my professors at Southwestern. Thank you guys for being here, him and his wife Melba. Blessings on you. Tonight, I thank you for being here. I want to invite you to come back this upcoming Sunday, where our wonderful pastor will be speaking on the miracles of Jesus.